All right. Whoa, this goes all the way back.
We don't interview uptight.
No, nice and relaxed. Chris Jackson, welcome to the Pirate.
Like
Can,
it.
can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm born in Alaska, raised somewhat up here, somewhat on the East Coast in New Hampshire. Always been an outdoorsy family, so Alaska's kind of been a prime place for us. Enjoy uh, kind of all the things, a lot of the hunting and fishing that Alaska's got to offer, and flying gets you there. So that's one of the reasons why we uh, we have flown. My dad's had PA-12s and 18s forever, and then we started 135 back 5 years ago now, and have just been enjoying flying people around the state, sharing it all with them. So that's kind of me. Um, Now we're running Alaska Air Taxi, my wife and I are, and that's a place we're hoping to share this state with everybody uh, from a charter standpoint. Get a lot done for the corporations and for the people that call this place home.
So your family owns Destination Air
Yep. So
in
Destination Alaska's
Alaska. Sorry.
is the parent company that we run Northwind Aviation
Okay.
and now Alaska Air Taxi underneath the umbrella, so to
And
speak.
Northwind is out of Homer,
Mm-hmm.
and you guys do a lot of float flying down there.
Yep.
Floats, but some tail dragger stuff as well.
Yep. We got some wheel planes, wheel beaver, the turbine beaver that's in the hangar here
Mm-hmm.
now, and the 206.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it's just straight floats.
Yep. Straight floats currently. A lot of bear viewing, a lot of hunting drop offs, hiking drop offs along the southern and eastern Kenai Peninsula, and then a lot of our own trips that we've kind of compiled for fishermen, where we do fly out fishing and fly out glacier tours and stuff like that.
So, uh, first, do you want to? Can you walk us through your qualifications and ratings?
Yeah. So where I sit today, I've got everything through commercial multi instrument, float rating, tailwheel, kind of just your essential backcountry Alaska package, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
the basic things you need to get around in the Alaskan plains, like cubs and beavers and 206s.
Multi-agency?
Not yet.
Not me either.
Not a Grumman man at the
The
moment.
elusive. So you and I met at Spurnack Airways. We were both flying sleds on the same 20-minute trip 5 times a day
Yeah.
over over last winter. You started out flying for your dad originally. What did your journey look like?
Yeah. I just went to get a private for fun.
Yep.
Um, Also about 5 years ago now, and then I just kind of worked my way up through the licenses, not even intending to work for the family company.
Mm-hmm.
It was always kind of an option, but I didn't feel entitled to it. I just knew I'd have to build up the qualification to work with them. So first job I got was at a flight school here, Land and Sea over there
Yep.
at Merrill, and then I was kind of looking into my summertime options, calling around the different 135s in the state. Didn't seem like I had enough time. I had like 700 or 800 hours, no float time, so that was the issue. I had a float rating,
Yeah.
um, so I was kind of at a standstill. John White has a 172 over here that is on floats, and I had intended to float instruct for him, which is a little ironic since I was green on floats. But you got to build it somehow,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew I good enough stick to kind of work through it and learn it with people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my intention for the summer. And then rather than that happening, my dad called me and said, "Why don't we just push you through to float readiness in the 206?" And that didn't take long. A couple weeks of training, running around in the ocean down in the southern Kenai Peninsula, and it'll teach you a lot quickly. Good hefty seas, tides to work with, tidal changes, checking the book before you go and make sure you're not gonna have it stack up after you land, where to a point where you can't take off or something like that. Um, so then got real good experience there a couple years ago in the summer, just doing you know pretty pretty standard, you know 135 stuff, VFR, dealing with bullcrap weather,
Yeah.
big oceans, crazy customers, and bear viewing and things like that. Good opportunities to meet a lot of great pilots out at Brooks Falls because it's a little bit of just a pilot get together.
Oh, really?
You land and everybody drops their people off for 4 hours, and you just sit around and shoot the shit and hang out and hear stories and talk about today's weather and talk about the best routes to get in and out and which way are you going home tonight, kind of thing. You know, and then did that again this last summer and flew Spurnack in between with you
Mm-hmm.
to last winter.
So float flying on the ocean is a whole different ball game from float flying in little ponds around Florida, which is all I've done.
Yeah.
Tell tell us a little more about you. You were talking about the tides. Can you tell us a little bit about like what are some of the bigger differences and how is it? How do you get used to that? How do you learn to deal with that?
Well, like you look outside on a day like today,
Mm-hmm.
if it was summertime, and you'd say, "Oh, it's a good flying day for floats because there's no wind and it's calm and sunny,
Mm-hmm.
right?" But in the on the ocean, yesterday's weather and the day before yesterday also matters because residual seas carry. There's a lot of energy left over in the ocean that's still spooling around, particularly the east side of the Cook Inlet. Not east side of Cook Inlet, but east side of the Kenai Peninsula,
Mm-hmm.
because the Gulf of Alaska is right there, and all that low pressure weather slams into the outside coast. So 2 3 days after a big low, you'll still have rollers piling in that you have to deal with. That a couple days prior were just getting going. You know, all the lakes will be die flat. So lakes really don't. You get to look at just today's weather most of the time to determine how a lake's state is going to be when you get there. The ocean, you got to be thinking back what happened yesterday.
Wow. And so then you also have some pretty tremendous tides that you're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So a lot of it, like it's very easy when you're flying lakes and the ocean in the same day
mm-hmm.
to park, stab the heels up on the sand, walk away for a couple minutes, and go, "Oh crap! You know, this is the ocean." Run back around the corner and your plane's like floating away. It's just like that's everybody's had their planes, start to float away on them at some point. Or you come back, and more commonly, I find that you're just randomly the tide's going out, and now you're starting to get high and dry. At this point, you're asking some of the customers to help push the floats out with you because this thing's too heavy for you to get off the beach. You know,
And you're pushing like beavers and,
beavers and
and
206s.
206s, so
Yeah, I
not
flew I
small
flew the
airplanes.
otter a bit too, but the otter is someone's always with it.
Oh, yeah.
It's big enough to where you're like I went along on some Hallow Bay bear viewing trips in the river, and the river at Hallow's tidal, so it goes up and down,
Oh, yeah.
but you also have the river current to deal with.
Right.
So when the tide's coming in, the river current kind of mellows out,
Mm-hmm.
and then when it goes out, the river current and the tide are working together. And I had like 3 or 4 different spring lines running to the cleats on the floats of the otter, and the wind's blowing, and the tide's trying to pull the nose around, and I've got lines running, and it was one of those things where it's a 2-person job every
Really.
time. Not every time, but if it's a 1-person job, you got to know exactly what you're doing, you know, because a Garrett engine doesn't start up right away either, so you can't just throw the line and hit the starter. It's you throw the line, hit the starter, and now you're working on adding fuel and paying attention to where you're drifting to now.
Oh wow.
You know,
So yeah, you've got a couple of seconds where you're just sailing
generally
while you're
30 seconds on a very fast. Well, it depends on what you use for the start, but usually 20 seconds to a minute.
geez.
Yeah,
And just to be floating
yeah.
at the mercy of the water and the wind.
Mm-hmm.
So can you this podcast really focuses on how not to die in backcountry Alaska. Can you share some of your insight and things that you've learned that have really made a difference in how you fly and how you plan for flying and how you avoid potential issues?
Yeah, yeah. Let me think about that.
Well, I'm sure you've had some close calls.
Yeah, I would say that 80% of your close calls flying up here are not going to be life or death. They're
Yeah,
going to be a bunch of bent metal and
yeah.
maybe some injuries. Like you take off in a beaver and you forget to set the flaps. You know,
Oh, yeah.
there is potential that somebody could die. It's a big deal.
Hmm.
But if you're in a short pond or taking off a short strip, particularly in a piston beaver, all bets are off as to whether or not you're gonna clear the terrain or notice the flaps are up prior to getting off the ground. So that's a scenario where somebody may or may not die in that.
Hmm.
But it's those you lift it off the ground. Now you're building a bunch of energy and speed, and you've got terrain to clear. That's something that you got to be pretty cautious of. Um, I One quick story: flying down Emerald Lake in Homer,
Hmm.
sits on the side. You've got a nice steep mountain,
Okay.
and then there's a small plateau, uh, about 1,400 feet up, and then the rest of the cliff drops down into the glacier ravine on the Grewing Glacier.
Hmm.
That cliff sits just to the northeast of the lake, and so when you come into land, you're landing right at the base of a tall hill. When the wind blows out of the northeast, it comes down and it spills down onto the lake. Um, Best takeaway for me is patience is key. You might you might get over there on a day, land. It was beautifully calm when you landed. Downdrafts start spiking down on the lake. You see black cat's paws sprawling out from one location and scattering, and you think it's getting worse. I gotta get out of here.
Mm.
In my opinion, that's the wrong thought right there. When you see that happen, it's let's wait this out. We need a good gap without seeing any of these cat's paws to go. And that also depends on if you're in the 206 or the otter and how heavy you are. But I've tried to take off in those, and it's not gonna. It's no joke. You put the power to, you see one spike, you should definitely pull the power on abort because you're gonna get airborne, and you're gonna be on the far side of the lake, headed into climbing terrain, and your altitude's gonna go down to nothing, and you're just gonna get shoved. So, um, knowing the wind, viewing it like a liquid as it
Yeah.
spills over, you know, mountains, that will save your bacon on a lot of occasions. Fuel planning,
Yep.
we all know. So I would say, you know, being patient, particularly as it relates to the wind on a takeoff
Hmm.
or a landing, particularly a takeoff. Um, don't be an idiot with your fuel.
Yeah.
As an operator, my first priority is to have good fuel meters in the plane
Hmm.
so that every pilot knows the exact gallon amount they have at
Hmm.
that moment. No gray areas. You know,
Yeah.
the gray area sits in how much of a headwind am I going to accumulate if I climb up over the range? Like let that be the gray area, not the plane.
Right.
You know, um, And then mostly just mountain pass. Some of the worst days for me, this even the last 2 summers, sunny days with intermittent rain in some of these passes with kind of like a low scattered overcast where
Mm-hmm.
it's intermittent heavy rain, because it kind of gives you this deceiving picture that you can see up through. You can see blue sky here and there.
Yeah.
Then you're getting something tight. That sun's beaming down through, rain's falling on the windshield, it's blinding you out,
Yep.
and usually those days are pretty windy too because it's a convective type day.
Mm-hmm.
So those are mostly the scenarios that have been less than ideal, where
Mm-hmm.
I've learned stuff the hard way. You know,
So when you get in those situations where you're in the canyon and you're going into IMC in an airplane that's not equipped for it, what what's your how far out are you making decisions? What's your course of action? What's a typical response look like?
I would say for me the biggest priority is, obviously we're all trying to avoid those mountain passes.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest priority is getting. I do two things. I slow the plane down
Yep.
so that I'm not in a scenario where I'm way behind everything. I want to be way ahead. Also, slowing down tightens your turning radius up.
Yep.
So if you need to get back out of there, and this I'm not talking if you are in the soup. I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking like your your flying and conditions are deteriorating, um, because that's where you need to be getting on it. You can't wait until you're screwed to start deciding to do stuff.
Yeah.
It's power it back, slow it down,
Mm-hmm.
keep a good level head on your shoulders about where you came from
Mm-hmm.
and what you're headed into. If things are narrowing up and the weather's dropping,
Yeah.
not worth it. I kind of have like a there's two or three factors that need to stack up to turn around. Um, Deteriorating viz, confusing wind. There's
Mm.
wind that can be 20 to 40 knots. That's very predictable.
Yeah.
And there are days where you go out there and you expect the wind to drop over a ridge like this,
Yeah.
and you're expecting a slight downdraft here. You're up at altitude, and all of a sudden you start climbing, and you're thinking, "Ooh, this is odd. This is weird. Not what I was expecting." So confusing winds, dropping visibility, and tightening corridors. You know,
Gotcha.
if you're in the mountains on the west side of the range, for example,
Mm-hmm.
that's a different story for me than if you're on the mountains on the east side of the Alaska range, where you've got the ocean as a baseline.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're in a valley, you have that ocean behind you as kind of this
Right.
zero level. But on the west side of the range, there's hills and valleys and lakes and all sorts of stuff that is varying terrain. There's no baseline. So
Right.
yeah, that's kind of how I view it. Is you've got a few things that start stacking up against you, and it's the visibility, the wind, and then if you have any fuel questions in your head, those three together, it's an immediate get the hell out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you have any sort of personal grogginess going on and you're not sharp as a tack, just like making clean cut, what good decisions, then you're you're your weakest link at that point.
It's a good point. You're talking about like fatigue from a long day, or maybe you stayed up too late
Yeah,
last night.
I mean anybody who's
Yeah.
flown 135 in Alaska knows that the end of your day
Yeah.
is sloppier than the beginning of your day.
Oh yeah.
There's like this peak when you're about an hour into flying for the
Mm-hmm.
day where you're the sharpest,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
because you're back in the saddle in the plane, you've been watching your engine, you've been watching your plane do its thing, and you're there.
Right.
Your last flight of the day, it's just kind of like you can feel it. Your whole body's just kind of doing everything a little bit less precisely, you know?
Oh yeah. It reminds me of all the times coming back into Merrill when I've been super late, and then Anchorage doesn't want to deal with giving me an approach into Merrill and clearing all that extra airspace, and so they like vector me around through IMC for like 20 minutes, and then right at the last second they're like, okay, descend to 1.6 and intercept the final approach course and cleared. And it's like, oh, that's a lot for 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's there's a lot of really great pilots in the state that have had fantastic careers of very good decision making,
Mm-hmm.
and one day kills them.
Yeah.
One bad decision or one, um, you know, whether or not they were drinking the day before, or however it all added up,
Yep.
they just got to that point where they made the wrong call in the wrong moment, tried to take off when they shouldn't have,
Yeah.
tried to descend to get out of the weather when they shouldn't have,
Mm-hmm.
tried to climb over something they knew they couldn't, or they couldn't clear, you know,
Yeah.
tried to overload their plane. I mean,
Not here in Alaska.
yeah, it's there's a lot of guys that, I mean, everybody knows somebody who's done that and
Oh
not
yeah.
made it out, you know.
Yeah. There's an operator we're both familiar with running a Navajo who lost an engine when he was pretty heavy and scraped it back in, and he'd been just climbing straight out, so like could barely make it back to the field with one engine.
Mm-hmm.
It was so heavy. And um, so you've been switching more toward we're here at Lake Hood, which wish you guys could see this. This is an absolutely beautiful view from the office. It looks out onto the lake itself, and you can see the mountains in the background. And right over there is International. And you're with Alaska Air Taxi are focusing a lot more instead of on the tourist side. You're focusing on doing longer charter runs with the fleet that you've currently got and are working on building. Is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, I want to come back to the core of Alaska Air Taxi.
Yeah.
Northwind's always been a tourism, not always, but Northwind, as we have owned it, has been a tourism company in Homer,
Mm-hmm.
and Alaska Air Taxi's been more of your, uh, you know, get the work done, get the contracts,
Yep.
uh, carry the electricians and the engineers and the corporation, uh, elders back and forth to villages all around the state in on-demand charter fashion,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that we're not going to have a assigned route.
Right.
A little bit less predictable work requires you to be a little bit more uh, cognizant of runway conditions because you're not going to see it every day.
Right.
It's not a line where you're like, oh, this one's getting soft. Let's keep an eye on it.
Yep.
It's one of those things where you're going to be making some phone calls before you go, or
Oh yeah.
calling somebody who does fly in there on a route.
Yeah.
So it's a really good business uh, to work your skill as a pilot with your decision making because you're going to be going new places every day,
Mm-hmm.
and dealing with new weather that you're not necessarily doing every single day.
Yeah.
So you've got to be well rounded to fly these folks.
Mm-hmm. And we keep coming back to the whole decision making thing, and um, it seems to me like the better your decisions on the ground, and the more planning you do, and the more work you do up front before you get in that airplane and take off, the less of the real cowboy skill that you need in order to get out of sticky situations once you get up into the air.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I think even with Alaska's limited weather resources,
Yeah.
we're not going in blind.
No.
There's Nobody should be surprised when they run up against heavy rainfall or
Yep.
low ceilings or
Mm-hmm.
fog or anything. It, it's first of all, fog, for example. We all know who fly, Western Alaska and Central Alaska that wind blows out of the west, fog stacks up on the west side of the mountains
Yep.
in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So wind blows out of the east, fog stacks up on the east side of the mountains in the morning. So
Yep.
we see this kind of, this is the mountain range in the middle. We see this shift back
Mm-hmm.
and forth of how the fog rolls. And uh, so there's even fog being um, one of the more unpredictable facets of weather is still fairly regular up here.
Right.
When it will clear, on the other hand, not as, that's a little bit more of everybody's guess, but if it's a blue sky above it, it's going to clear quicker. If there's an
Mm-hmm.
overcast above it, it's going to take most of the day probably,
Yeah.
or it's not going to clear.
Mm-hmm.
So weather is, like, to answer your question, weather is not horrible in this state. We can't act like we can launch into whatever because we didn't know it was there.
Mm-hmm.
There's decent weather, especially with apps like Windy,
Yeah.
on top of all of the government sources we have out
Mm-hmm.
there.
We've got uh, the FAA weather cams, which are huge because you have a lot of airports that don't have weather reporting, but they have a weather cam, and you can get.
Yeah, I rely on those. A METAR does me about, in my opinion, does about half as good as the cams.
Yeah.
If I look at Lake Clark Pass east and west,
Yeah.
that's that's half the information I need for the day.
Yeah.
Just to get over the range, because it's, you can see it. You can see everything that's
Mm-hmm.
going on if it, with the cameras. Volcano observatory cameras I use.
Yep.
The chain's great for those. Um, Augustine cameras, Hallow Bay. There's a new lodge down there that's got,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe just south of there. I think Kukak. They've got a lodge um, that's got a camera. The Yeah, so yes, it does dwindle the excuses you have when you get out there
Mm-hmm.
to be surprised by something. You shouldn't really be that surprised, but a lot of times there's local weather and then there's the big picture.
Right.
You
Right.
show up and maybe this one passage between the islands has its own stuff going on.
Right.
So I'm a big 1 minute at a time kind of guy,
Yeah.
because just because something's deteriorating doesn't mean that it's going to go below legal minimums or go below your uh, personal minimums. It's like, notice the trends, recognize it, but go a mile at a time until it's turnaround worthy. Just prep 1 mile. If you're safe this mile, you're safe that mile. It's a mile behind you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're safe every single mile, you're just kind of thinking about it as small baby steps toward the end goal of
Mm-hmm.
getting to your destination safe, then you're golden. You know, one of some of the worst decision making I saw this last summer came from uh, another guy in a 206. I was flying back from Brooks. He was flying back from Brooks, and I was talking to him on the radio. He was going through McNeil. I was going through Little Kamashack, so we were kind of parallel valleys. So we lost radio communication for a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and he got into some weather that he was not comfortable with, and he started just over expressing it on the radio. Kind of telling everybody he was freaked out, he was done, like, this is horrible. He's quitting with his operator. He's done. Customers are in the plane with him. He's freaking out. He's out over the ocean at this point and decides to turn around and head back into the mountain valley in the bad weather. And all of us just could not believe our ears. We all were sitting there thinking, what an idiot. You're over the ocean,
He's on floats.
on floats,
Oh.
over the ocean. You've got a 0 point. The weather's already bad. Don't go back into the hills in the soup. And so he disregards all of us, and we're all out here going, you're your own decision maker. He's the only guy who knows what's going on in his plane. But it was one of those things where we all knew the weather wasn't great,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't. He just forgot to take it a mile at a time, and realized that he had just gotten through the worst section, which is the mountain pass. And suddenly he decides to turn back and go into the worst section, because it's heavier precip out ahead of him or something like that. So mile at a time is my biggest thing. Every corner you round in the mountains is going to be some sort of surprise, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be you got to be present in the moment and be thinking about it practically.
So just do this stretch safe, and then
Yeah,
face the next decisions.
yeah,
Once you're in the air, you're like, hey, I'm gonna fly this. I'm gonna fly through the Narrows as safe as I can,
mm-hmm.
and then I'm gonna fly to Summit Lake as safe as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah,
Did that guy live?
yeah. But he left the plane and the customers in Iliamna to fend for themselves. He took Alaska Airlines and left.
No way.
Yeah, yeah, it's unbelievable. That's how I heard it. That's how I heard it went.
Oh wow.
Because we all got back to the dock in Homer and looked around and went, "Where'd he go?
Hmm.
He's not here." And then the plane didn't show up for several days, and come to find out the operator had to go get it. So
Oh wow.
yeah, it's pretty rough.
Think you'll ever fly for a commercial operator again?
I don't know.
That's
There's, I would say, if I had to sum it up respectfully, it was a very lower 48 mentality, like very, um, it was very, I need this to be black and white.
yeah.
I need flight service to give me a flight plan and file me and tell me what to do. And
Yeah.
nobody could tell him what to do. We all were sitting here thinking this takes creative um, decision making, because it's not, no one's holding your hand.
Yeah. I remember one of my first flights where it was like I hadn't gotten my commercial yet, but I was doing an instrument flight, and it was like going to be instruments all the way there, and I needed some help figuring out the chances of icing, and so I called up, got a full briefing, and they were like, "Yeah, no problem at all," and I launched, and you don't have that kind of black and white go no go up here a lot of times. A lot of times, like I had to brief the weather in Kaktovik for one of the operators I worked for, and there's no weather reporting anywhere around there for, I think it's 50 miles is the closest TAF,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get no. I don't think there was a weather cam at the time. There may be now, but you get a METAR, and then you get like the the area forecasts, and you got to figure out if it's worth flying for 2 hours, if you'll be able to get in once you get over there. And it's like,
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. How much is any of it worth it?
yeah,
Because we all know the best day, the most beautiful weather day is right after the worst weather day.
oh yeah,
You know, and so just sleep on it.
yeah, it'll be cold right after the
Yeah, yeah,
terrible weather,
exactly.
but it'll be crisp and clear and mild winds.
Yep, normally that's how it goes.
Yeah,
We all know stories of people piling it in, and the search and rescue pictures come back on like gorgeous blue sky days,
yeah,
and it's tragic because we're all sitting here going, 15 hours later,
yeah,
this is what you would have been flying in, not sitting there scraping at the windshield trying to lean forward to get better view. It's like, what are we doing?
yeah. So where do you see Alaska Air Taxi going? What's the future for AAT?
I think one of the biggest things Marissa and I have talked about is for us to look back 30 years from now and see a business that we uh, are grateful we ran. We want it to be one where every customer is, sounds cliche to say it, but where every customer is prioritized well,
Hmm.
because I think there's a lot of demand for flying in this state, particularly in the summer. And every single operator has the choice to stretch themselves too thin.
Yep.
Every single one. Because there's enough flying with the tourists, the summer contracts, the commercial fishermen, the villagers wanting to get projects done, the blue collar operations trying to get contracts and buildings built and other things like that. There's enough going on here where you can stretch yourself thin
Hmm.
and uh, let the quality go to crap.
Oh yeah.
And so I would like to. There's a shift where your priority goes from the customer to the profits, and that's where the quality goes downhill quickly, because there's always going to be opportunity for more profits if you're willing to sacrifice some of the customer experience by overbooking yourself, overcommitting, trying to double and triple up on a single flight leg,
Yeah.
screwing over one person's timeline to add five more people on the back haul. You know,
Hmm.
uh, so Marissa and I we've chatted a lot about trying to run a company that is just a humble organization that really tries to be good quality. And I think it starts with like the phone calls. Someone calls in. I always want a pilot to answer the phone because I want the people who are on the other line to be able to ask good questions and have somebody who flies and knows the weather in the state, knows the weight and balance, knows the airplanes, knows what today's weather looks like in relation to flying, and the realism of some of the mechanical difficulties that every operator faces, knows those factors and can answer the questions well and not be a just a cliche salesman. Like I
Hmm.
would rather it be someone personal that's like, hey, this I can do this for you. Here's my price. You might want to check with this operator because they're going to be a really good fit for that job. Or you're a hunter trying to go out to this location. Um, I know this guy who knows that location perfectly and can get you in and out when the weather's kind of marginal or when it's not. Uh, Here's an operator that knows this area well and it's going to be a very, very safe bet for you on getting in and out during the crappy fall season or whatever it may be. Um, so I see this company not blowing up into something massive, but rather staying steady and streamlined with good service and quality planes, of course, and good pilots and personability.
Nice. So you're gonna focus more on the customer experience rather than just
Yeah,
getting as much
yeah. Focus
weight.
focus on the locals, and part of me enjoying it is I don't want to show up at a village and be like super heavy on my timeline.
Oh yeah.
Even if it's summertime, I want to be able to stop and talk to you know Rob or Bill or Sue or whoever's at the village and just
Yeah.
stop and ask them, how's your kid? You
Yeah.
know, did they do good in the Native Youth Olympics this year
Yeah.
or whatever it is? Um, because we're all doing it for that. Well, not everybody, but that's what Marissa and I are doing it for. And
Hmm.
um, I tell people that one of my goals is I want to know your dog's birthday. You know, and it's hyperbole, of course, but the goal is that when I show up there, it's not, hey, Alaska Air Taxi pilot. It's
Hmm.
like, Chris, how's it going? Hugs. How's your family? How's the kids doing? You
Hmm.
know, and and then there's some reciprocal relationship there. You know,
I remember when we were working at Spurnax, and I was kind of, I wouldn't say not the most personable, but like I wasn't adding any personal touch to anything. I was just flying the legs, and you showed me like, hey, spend a couple extra seconds, like turn around when you do the uh, passenger briefing, and instead of asking if your passengers want earplugs, hold some earplugs out and say, who wants earplugs?
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, if they use the earplugs, it's going to make their experience better if they need them.
Yeah.
And, they may not want to raise their hand, but if you're offering them,
Right.
and making a note of, oh, it is bumpy this morning versus, because that's the kind of stuff that
Yeah.
people want to know. Like, is it bumpy? Are we gonna have trouble getting in? Like, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. The It doesn't take a lot of extra time
no,
to shake a hand and exchange names.
yeah, no,
And the big thing I do is when I go out to a village, I'll see a face I know.
mm-hmm,
I've asked them their name 4 times. I'll
mm-hmm,
walk back up to them and say, I'm gonna get it one of these times. I'm Chris. You're, and then they're like, you know, whoever, and they're like, okay, and I'm gonna try to remember that. I keep a name list
oh, really?
that's like, I just say the names of X. Like, I've got a book that's the names of Brooks Falls,
Huh.
and it's got the waitresses and the waiters at the lodge, and the fish and game, and the other pilots and what operators they work for. And I won't remember somebody's name at all, and I'll
Mm-hmm,
see their face and I'll be like, I know that, or I know they're in my name book.
mm-hmm.
Go back through. Oh yeah, that was so and so. That was Kaylee at the lodge, or that was, you know, Nick, the guide, or the fishing guide, or whatever it might be.
That's awesome. I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, the that helps a lot.
Yeah.
I started that back when I was going to Mexico to work with some kids on a we were constructing for a women's shelter,
Mm-hmm,
and uh, tough to remember all these little Mexican kids' names because they're all like the cliche names that
mm-hmm.
you've got
Jose
little Miguel
Jesus.
and
Yeah.
Jose and you know
Yeah.
Antonio, and you're like, it's hard to remember those because it just feels like, it's like when they come here and meet like John and
John.
Chris,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, and so that's where I started that, and I like that.
Nice. Nice. So, for somebody who's, if, you did all of your training up here or some down in
All up
this?
here, pretty
Okay.
much. I got like 8 hours in Ohio or something.
Yeah. Where at in Ohio?
Uh, Xenia,
Uh,
next to Dayton.
oh, what were,
Random.
yeah. What were you float flying down there? Or?
No, I was just in college, and I
Oh,
wanted to build some time,
nice.
some grass strip work, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, so for pilots who want to move up from the States and come fly up here, uh, do you have advice for those guys? Like, maybe not from personal experience, but maybe from the students or employees that you've worked with who've moved up from the States?
I would say a humble persistence is the key. I've had guys call me and looking for jobs that were just very adamant that they were a good fit for Alaska.
Yeah.
And okay, how many hours of Alaska time do you have? None. Oh, I flew with my buddy in his 180 once in Anchorage. You know, okay. So how do you even know you want to fly up here? How do I know you're not going to get up here and leave because it's too cold, or
Mm-hmm.
because there's not the amenities, or Amazon takes too long to get here?
It does.
You know, what's 3 weeks on Amazon
Right.
for? The squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Mm-hmm.
The guys who come back every 5 months,
Mm-hmm.
every 4 months, and say, "Hey, giving you a call. Anything opened up? Here's what I'm trying to do to become more valuable to your operation."
I like that.
Because everything's a value coefficient.
Yeah.
How much value are you presenting?
Mm-hmm.
How much of the resources how much value monetarily am I giving you for your value?
Right.
So it's this exchange. And I did an interview flight last week with a guy,
Mm-hmm.
and long time, Alaska, not super long time, but medium time Alaska pilot,
Mm-hmm.
and the value is there. I said, hop in the plane, take me to Hope, take me to Girdwood. It had snowed a bunch, so I wanted to see his decision making.
Yeah.
Uh, so I didn't didn't say a whole ton when we got in the air. Said land me in Hope, land me in Girdwood.
Mm-hmm.
Hope was not plowed, nothing was maintained. It was just crappy, and I knew that, and I wasn't gonna actually have him land,
Mm-hmm.
but I wanted to see if he'd come to that conclusion
Yeah.
because I told him to land at Girdwood.
Yeah.
You know, and good decision or at Hope, good decision making goes over there. Knows the arm, knows the wind,
Mm-hmm.
circles around, makes some good calls in there on the right frequencies. Doesn't land in Hope. Says nah, not worth it. Goes to Girdwood, sees it. Yeah, it looks good. How's the wind? The wind's good. It's mild. Let's land up the valley and take off down the valley. Good decisions. That's
Perfect.
what I would do, and that's smart. And there was probably 3 or 4 inches of snow on the runway that was all tracked up, so it
Mm-hmm.
was good footwork, and
Yeah.
the guy was very very clean in the plane and nice. And for lower 48ers coming up, you've got to be able to come up and exhibit, come up here and learn how to make some of the decisions up here.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have to put up with a better than thou mentality from all of the operators because we all want people with Alaska time.
Yep.
And some people are going to be mean about it. I try not to be mean about it. Like, hey, I understand you flew in the thunderstorm season in Oklahoma. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot to glean there.
Yep.
The tornado season, but it's not applicable 98% of the time up here.
Right.
You know, so come up here and learn what is applicable to this state.
Mm-hmm.
Slush runways,
Oh, yeah.
downdrafts in the mountains,
Mm-hmm.
reading the water,
Yep.
dealing with villagers. There's a lot of good stuff that you've got to learn to be valuable up here.
Back to reading the water. Now that you mention it, you were talking earlier about cat's paws, which is something I'm not familiar with from my 6.4 hours of float time.
Yeah. Well, you fly the Aleutians, right?
Yep.
You watch the water a lot.
Yeah. Is that when it goes like
Yeah, yeah.
like that?
A cat's paw is just you got that light color silvery water, and then the dark band. That's a cat's paw.
Oh, okay.
And so, particularly a cat's paw, in the term I'm using it, is where it branches out and you've got dark bands heading in multiple directions.
Oh, gotcha.
Um, even flying wheels,
Mm-hmm.
I read the water is my number one resource
Yeah.
because a windsock isn't going to do you anything for telling you the gusts
No.
when you're going to Tionic. That windsock's always torn, always hung up on the pole.
Yep.
It never is reading right.
Yep.
They put so much work into it too. It's unfortunate for them, but the ocean right next door
Yeah.
on final approach can tell you if you're going to hit 5 gusts or 20 or none.
Yeah.
On your short final.
Yeah, and that little roller when you're landing, was
Yeah.
it back to the north?
Yeah, and there's even that little pond there.
Yep.
You might see
Yep.
the ocean coming like this out of turn again, and the pond's coming like this out of the northwest.
Oh, yeah.
And you're going, okay, this is going to be interesting. But it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, ahead of time.
You've got resources. It's a whole wind map right in front of you.
Right.
So there's what's it, the Beaufort scale.
Mm-hmm.
That shows you all the different steps of here's what the water does at 6 knots. Here's what the water does at 12 to 15.
Mm-hmm.
Here's 25 to 30.
Yep.
That's a really good piece of info to memorize, regardless of if you ever fly floats in this state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use it all the time, even in the Navajo, because you can, there are ponds everywhere, all over Alaska, and half the year they're liquid water.
The water is probably my number one weather resource.
Yeah.
Once I take off.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
A lot of it around here. Well, Chris Jackson, thanks for coming on the Pirate.
Yes, sir. It's fun.